Hey everyone, this is Jason Long with Brainleaf, and today we're going to be talking about all the things that project managers and digital teams forget to plan for when they're doing a website project. This can also be for something like a software as a service project or an app or really just all sorts of different kinds of projects. So when you're writing your scope of work, these are the things you need to think about. And these are the things not to forget, because if you do forget them, you're going to end up losing time, you're going to lose money, you're going to have an upset client, and you're going to be upset. So let's go through this list. I've got my notes today for us. All right, so first off, the information architecture writing. So the first thing you have to do when you're putting together a scope of work is write out the information architecture. You have to know what pages you're building, what goes on those pages, what's the functionality of those pages, because how are you going to deliver a quote if you don't know what you're building? And that takes a lot of time. You have to go through and talk to the client, figure out what they need, figure out what's feasible, what's not feasible, what's in their budget, what's not in their budget, etc., etc., etc. And so it's really, really important that you make sure to write all this stuff up. I mean, what builder would start building a house without a blueprint? None of them, because why would you do that? That's crazy. The same thing applies to building a website. You've got to have that information architecture. And so when you're working on this, when you're working on your scope of work, you have to take into account the time for the meetings with the client, for your planning time, so your research time and all of that, and then the time to write everything up and present it to the client. And if you've done all this, then you know that it's really a reasonable amount of time you have to put into these things. So when you're doing your scope of work, think about that. The next is all the project setup stuff. A lot of times, digital agencies will get started and they'll say, oh, we're just going to build the thing. And the things that they forget to plan for are things like setting up their PM tools. And I don't mean writing all of the tasks into your project management tools. I mean setting up the tool. So somebody has to go into Jira or Asana or Teamwork or ClickUp or whatever it is that you're using and put all the tasks into the system. You have to take all the stuff from the information architecture that you sold, put it into the system, list out who's doing what task, write up your sprints if you're doing an agile framework, or just write everything if you're doing a waterfall framework. But you have to spend time to write all this stuff up, and then you have to invite your client. You have to make sure the client understands how to use it. You have to make sure your team knows what's going on. You have to make sure that everybody knows what's going on. And on top of that, you also have to add them into things like QuickBooks so you can bill them. For us, we add them into Harvest so we know how to track time against them. We have to add them into Confluence because we have a project file and all the project information listed in Confluence. So I think I'm actually missing something now that I'm listing these out just for me. And for you, it's the same thing. You've got to list these clients in all of these different places, and that takes time. And if you think about it, it's maybe like an hour, 2 hours just to get all these things started. But you multiply that times all those projects, and that's a lot of money. It's really, really a lot of money. So don't forget that when you're planning out your project. The next, and people often don't forget about this, but it's kind of part of the other pieces, is the kickoff meeting. A lot of times what happens is that people do the kickoff meeting, but it wasn't actually written into the scope of work. And so a lot of times people don't bill for that kickoff meeting. And you've got all of your team there. So you're spending a ton of money on all these people being in this meeting all at one time. So make sure you're billing for that in your scope of work, or you're planning for it, you're thinking about it in your scope of work. All right, other things. Hosting. It's like 10 minutes to set up spin up a new server, but you got to charge for it. It's 10 minutes. You got to take care of that. Same thing with setting up a code repository. Something with both the code repository and the hosting is that you have to tell all your team members about it. And it may be as simple as just an email, but you're probably now going to also add it to your team meeting. You're going to add it into your reminders. You got to put a team together. You got to make sure everybody knows where it is. You got to list all this information somewhere. You got to store all the passwords somewhere. That takes time. And it takes more time than a lot of people think it takes. So Don't forget to account for that amount of time. Next, your content management system. So, let's say you're using WordPress or Drupal or Craft or whatever system it is that you're using, somebody still has to, some developer or some person has to go and set up that system in your hosting environment. And that takes time. And a lot of people don't bill for that. They just say, oh, it's part of like building the homepage or planning out whatever. It takes time. You got to bill for it. All right. Next, people don't forget about this one as much, but there's a trick to this. So this is figuring out either finding or developing the theme for the site. There's a couple little pieces here. The main place that people forget is billing for the time to find a theme. So if you're building a custom themed website, like let's say you're doing WordPress site, custom theme, you're gonna bill for that because you're gonna have a whole big process of design that you're going through with that. So I'm not worried about that at all. But a lot of times, smaller or newer shops, or web shops, are gonna say, oh, we'll just find a theme for you. It's never that easy. It always takes time. It's an hour-long meeting with a client. It's an hour of looking for stuff, at least. It's an hour of putting together mood boards. It's an hour of, just all sorts of stuff. And that stuff takes a lot of time, and I constantly see that underbilled by digital agencies, especially younger digital agencies. So if you're just putting together a theme for people, don't forget, you gotta bill all that time. All right, let's see. And then of course, like the working with a client part of that. There's so much time you're gonna end up going back and forth with a client, like, here's these more mood boards, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? How about these areas, etc. Even if you're just doing a pre-built, ready-made, theme-based website, it still takes a lot of time. Okay, next item is mobile responsiveness. So a lot of times web shops want to say, okay, we're going to put this theme together, we're going to use this theme, this pre-built theme, but it doesn't always work on mobile. And what you end up having is like, on mobile device, you end up having like a little tiny homepage promo, like the big slider at the top, but now it's like this big, you can't read it, it serves no purpose, and you got to get rid of it. So somebody has to go into that theme, put in the code to take it out on mobile, make sure it works well, go back and do the cross-browser compatibility testing on it, etc., and that takes time. So don't forget to add your mobile responsive times into things because people always forget that. Okay, next up, this is probably one of the more important things. It's all the things you're not going to do as part of this project. When you're writing your scope of work, it's so important to say, we're not doing this. And here are a couple things that are really important to note whether you are or are not doing it, whether you are or are not responsible for it. The first thing is SEO, because when clients come in, they're going to say, what about all the metadata for every single page? And if you build for that, fantastic. If you've done the keyword research, fantastic. But a lot of times for us, we actually build that as a totally separate project. Maybe we'll agree to go in and put in basic stuff, but we're not going through and doing a ton of research as part of a website build project. We'll build that as a totally separate project in our marketing because we want an ongoing marketing project with that client so that we can actually do a good job. Because as you probably know, if you just putting in that metadata isn't going to make any difference at all unless you do a little bit more than that. But the client's still going to want it. So you got to say whether you're doing it or not doing it. And that's right in line with the next one, which is your content. So I've seen this several times. I've talked to so many digital agency owners who come in and they're like, yeah, we didn't plan on doing this content for this client, wasn't in the contract, but it didn't state it specifically, and we got stuck doing it. And it cost a lot of money. And I'm sure you guys know, like when you got to write content for an entire site, that's so much time and is so much money. So make sure to put it in your scope of work. Yep, we're doing this, or nope, we're not doing it. Because that adding no, we're not doing this will save your butt on things sometimes. And that also applies very specifically to certain features. So if you talk to the client about a specific feature you're working on, but you're not going to build it as part of the initial scope of work, make sure to put it into that list of things that you're not building. Because if you have the conversation and you don't write it down that we're not doing this thing in phase one, the client is inevitably going to come back and say, what about that thing we talked about? It happens all the time, and it can so easily be solved by just saying you're not doing it. So this very brief story on that. We had actually put that into a large-scale project that we're doing. There was a section for a manufacturing ERP system that we were building, and we specifically noted, because I know this thing happens, I specifically noted, we're not doing this piece. And the client came back about 6 months into the project and said, oh, what about that piece? You said you're going to do that piece. And the project manager freaked out and was like, oh no, we don't have that plan. And the client was like, no, we talked about it. You said you're doing it. No, take a look at the scope of work. Somebody wrote in there, we're not doing this item. And that probably saved us. And we probably wouldn't have ended up doing it because it wasn't billed at all. It wasn't planned at all. But it saved us in the very least a really difficult conversation with what was otherwise a very happy client. And the fact that it was in there just disappeared. And altogether, that portion of the project was probably $20,000 to $30,000 piece of work. So we may have ended up having to compromise if we hadn't written that in. So make sure you do that. Okay. All right. The next thing that people forget about is your pre-launch checklist. So these are things like the project manager or whoever the lead stakeholder is going in and double checking that all the pages that you're supposed to build are built. On a little tiny website, no big deal. It's easy. It's like 5 pages, whatever. But if you're doing a government website and it's got 1,000 pages, somebody's got to look through every one of those 1,000 pages, click every single one, and make sure every single one has all that content. That takes time, so make sure you plan for that. Checking in iOS and Android. Once again, it's a little thing. It's almost always covered in most people's contracts or scope of work, but make sure to put it into yours because I've gotten burned a couple times where it just wasn't planned out properly. We ended up, obviously we do it, but it was something where it didn't work on some weird platform, some weird combination of Android and Safari or something like that. And so these days we have it in our contract and our scope of work, what every platform is that we're checking on mobile and on desktop. So we also have the next section, which is our cross-browser compatibility. And somebody has to go and do all that checking, but you also need to state in your scope of work what you're doing and what you're not doing, because you're not going to test this on every potential combination of every browser and OS. It's just not going to happen. Or maybe you are, but you need to bill that time. So don't forget about that. Next up, next several things. Speed checks, got to go and check your speed. Sitemap, got to make sure that sitemap is on there. Google Analytics, or whatever analytics system you're using, got to make sure that's installed. Any of the third-party systems that are going onto the system. So maybe you're using Lucky Orange or Hotjar or, Optimizely, or whatever it is that you're using, Google Tag Manager. You got to make sure all that stuff is in there. Somebody's got to go back through and double check it. This next one, I've seen so many people mess this up. Don't forget, you got to go in, if you're building a WordPress website, you got to go in and make sure that robots.txt is set to searchable. I can't tell you how many times people have come to me and said, I had this design company build this website for us like 3 years ago. We've never ranked for anything. Can you help us? The first thing I do is I go take a look at tools, reading, I think that's right, and then enable this site to be searched by search engines is almost always turned off. And it's like a 2-second fix, but you gotta put it in that list and bill the 2 seconds, if nothing else, just so that you remember to do it. All right, and then next, the thing that people forget, project launch. Somebody's got to go in and change those DNS settings. They got to double check your MX records. You got to go in and make sure that the site launches properly, and then somebody's got to go back through and double check everything after the site launches. And people forget that all the time. So you're talking like an hour, 2 hours, 5 hours if it's a big project, but make sure to bill it, because why wouldn't you? You're doing the work anyway, so bill the time. And then my number one, I should have said this at the very beginning, the number one biggest thing that everybody forgets is so simple. It's your project management time. So much time goes into project management, like so much time. You've got a project manager working, you've got to bill their time. What we do is we say for a small project, it's 20% of the billed hours of the project. And so often, this is the thing where newer companies, also newer digital agencies, mess up in their scope of work, is they underestimate how much time it takes for the project management side of the project. They want to bill all of the stuff towards the build, and they don't think about how many hours it takes for a project manager to work with that client, to work with that team, to make sure that everything is written out, to make sure everything is planned. It's a lot of time. It's about 20% of the hours. So don't forget that piece. It's really important. And the more project management time you have, the smoother that project is going to go. And of course, the more planning you do, the smoother that project is going to go. So that's it. That's my list of top items that people forget when they are scoping out a website project. And specifically in this case, it was a WordPress project. But like I said before, you could apply this to so many other things as well. I wonder, I can't remember if I mentioned the plugins. I think so. Don't forget to plan for your plugins as well. But anyway, that's the list. I hope this is helpful for you. If you have any questions, if I missed anything, let me know. Put it down in the comments. I would love to hear from you. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon.